Welcome, friends. Welcome once again to the True Shadow Hauntings. Hope you liked our last video. Today I have appeared before you with a new chilling true incident. Today's story is a terrifying real experience that happened to an army member named Soren. During the Vietnam War in the 70s, Soren had a mysterious connection with the unsatisfied souls of a plane crash. What exactly happened to him in a bunker while on duty, you will be shuddered to know. Before starting the main incident, if you are new to our channel, then subscribe right now and stay with us by giving a like to the video. Because your every like and subscription encourages us to find more terrifying true incidents and bring them before you. The way Soren sent us the description of his experience, I am reading it out to you in that exact way. Let's go back to that terrifying incident. Stay with the True Shadow Hauntings.
I am Soren. A large part of my life was spent in the rugged mountains of Montana and in the ice-covered forests of Alaska. But that November of 2018 was completely different. I was sent on a special mission of the U.S. Army Reserve to an extremely remote outpost adjacent to the Appalachian Trail. The place was called Blackwood Ridge. You won't find any official existence of it on a map. Among the locals, this place is considered cursed because over the past decade, 5 hikers have gone missing from here, whose whereabouts have never been found to this day. At the beginning of that winter, the weather was bone-chilling. Dense pine forests all around, and the fog was so thick that you couldn't even properly see your own hand. When my team and I arrived there, the atmosphere felt strangely heavy. In American folklore, we have heard about many kinds of skinwalkers or wendigos, but to a soldier equipped with modern weapons, these were nothing more than absurd stories. Our task was to reactivate an old underground signal station in that area. On the very first day of posting, something inside me felt wrong. The bunker that was assigned to us was from the time of the Second World War. The walls were made of a mixture of stone and cement, and a damp, musty smell was coming from there. The oldest sergeant of the camp, Atlas, looked at me with a strange expression. While sipping his coffee, he said, "Soren, when night falls here, it's not enough to just keep your eyes open. You must keep your ears open too. And remember, if someone calls your name in the dark, don't ever turn back to look." I had laughed off his words at that time. I thought long-term isolation had probably messed with Miller's mind. My duty was from 12 a.m. to 3 a.m. Signal jammers were installed all around, so mobile phones or the internet were completely useless. In my hand, there was only a flashlight and a signal gun kept for service. At midnight, when the mountain wind was howling through the pine trees, I felt as if someone was breathing right on the back of my neck. Chasing the American dream, we often forget the difference between reality and unreality. But that night, Blackwood Ridge made me realize that beyond science there are forces that are beyond human imagination. As the darkness slowly grew even denser, I felt from deep within the forest a pair of glowing yellow eyes were staring at me unblinkingly. That was the beginning of the longest and most mysterious night of my life. Keeping Sergeant Atlas's mysterious warning in mind, I started walking toward my bunker. The clock then read 1:32 a.m. The surroundings were so silent that even the sound of my own breathing pierced my ears like a sword. Army training teaches us to remain calm in any adverse environment, but the isolation of this section of the Appalachian Trail was completely different. Here, the wind was not blowing. There was no sound of crickets. The entire forest seemed to be suffocating under some unknown blanket of fear. When I entered the bunker, the biting cold shook me to my bones. The bunker was deep underground, the gray concrete walls damp with moisture. As I swept the high-beam flashlight in my hand around the room, I saw an old wooden table in the corner and a few rusted chairs. According to American folklore, when dead silence or unnatural stillness descends in a deserted place, You should understand you are not alone." I placed my M4 carbine rifle to the side and picked up the coffee mug, and at that very moment, the first strange incident occurred. Suddenly, from the corner of the bunker, I heard the sound of something heavy being dragged. It felt as if someone was very carefully pulling an iron chain across the floor. I immediately grabbed my weapon and shouted, "Who's there? Identify yourself!" But there was no response. Only my own voice echoed back to me. I searched every inch of the bunker, but there was nothing there except rats. I thought maybe it was air moving through old pipelines or some kind of technical issue. I sat back down at the desk. It was exactly 1:45 a.m. Suddenly, I noticed that the temperature inside the bunker was beginning to drop unnaturally. Vapor was coming out with my breath. Then, right behind me, only a few inches away, I heard a raspy voice. Someone whispered very softly, "Soren, look behind you." An icy chill ran down my spine. In the forests of Texas, we often hear stories of hikers going missing, whose final moments reportedly included hearing sounds like this. I knew Sergeant Atlas had said not to turn back, but the curiosity and reflex of an army soldier compelled me. I spun around quickly and shone the torch. There was no one there, but unbelievably, on that solid concrete wall of the bunker, I saw a wet handprint. The print was much larger than that of a full-grown human, and the fingers were unnaturally long. The most astonishing thing was that black-colored liquid was still dripping from the print. When I reached out to examine it with my hand, the heavy steel door above the bunker slammed shut on its own with a deafening sound. Bam! Someone locked it from the outside. I began to scream and slam against the door, but outside there was a silence like a grave. All I could hear was that whispering sound, now echoing from all around the bunker. I realized this ancient bunker of Blackwood Ridge was not just a place for us to stay. It was actually a cage for some malevolent entity in which tonight I had voluntarily imprisoned myself. When that heavy steel door of the bunker slammed shut, it felt as if I had been trapped in a living grave. I grabbed the door handle and pulled with all my strength, but it didn't move even an inch. Yet I had heard no sound of any lock being applied from outside. Beads of sweat began forming on my forehead, even though the temperature inside the bunker was below freezing. I tried to calm myself. At that very moment, outside the bunker, just on the other side of the door, I heard the sound of heavy boots. The sound was rhythmic, exactly like the march of an experienced soldier. I thought maybe Sergeant Atlas or some other guard was playing a joke on me. I shouted, "Atlas, it's not funny! Open the door!" But there was no reply. Instead, that walking sound started from the other side of the door, slowly, and then moved on to the roof of the bunker.
Remember, our bunker was carved underground, and its roof was nearly 3 feet thick concrete. For any ordinary human, walking across that concrete and having the sound clearly reach below would be almost impossible. But I could hear it clearly. Someone was pacing directly above the bunker. There was a strange weight to the sound of those boots. It felt as if a monster weighing several tons was walking overhead. With each step, cement dust fell from the ceiling above my head. In America's national parks, there are many creepypastas or legends about missing people. Many of the missing individuals who returned said they had heard the footsteps of someone in the forest, yet no one could be seen. At that moment, it felt as if I was facing those legendary phantom steps. I put on my night vision goggles and looked out at the forest through a small ventilation slit of the bunker. Outside, the moonlight filtered through the gaps between the pine trees, casting an ominous shadow on the ground. Suddenly, I saw someone was walking over the snow in the open area in front of the bunker. I could trace the footprints. They were those of standard army combat boots. But the most terrifying thing was, those boot prints were appearing one after another over the snow, even though there was no person there.
as if some invisible soldier was marching on the parade ground. Those invisible footprints began moving straight toward my ventilation window. I stepped back. Just then, the walking sound directly above the roof, right over my head, stopped. For a moment, it felt as though the entire forest had stopped breathing. Then began that primeval terror. Someone began kicking the heavy steel door of the bunker with full force. Each kick made the entire bunker shake like an earthquake. I kept my finger on the trigger of my M4 rifle, aiming at the door. There have been many unresolved incidents in American history where soldiers went insane under attacks by invisible enemies at military outposts. I realized, tonight, my fate might be heading that way too. Just then, the kicking stopped, and a strange kind of wailing sound began coming from the radiator pipes inside the bunker. It was not a human cry, it was something beyond this world. The inhuman wailing from the bunker's radiator pipes felt like it was tearing my eardrums apart. I pressed both hands over my ears, but the wailing echoed directly inside my brain. Just when it felt like I could no longer endure it, suddenly everything went silent. In an instant, that unnatural stillness returned. I noticed the door that had not budged in any way for so long was now slightly ajar. The cold mist from outside was creeping into the bunker through that narrow gap. I knew going outside could be suicidal, but staying inside the bunker was even more dangerous. I turned on the tactical light on my M4 rifle and stepped outside extremely cautiously. The forest outside had taken on a hellish form. The familiar pine forests of Montana now seemed hundreds of skeletal hands reaching out, standing upright. The fog was so thick, it felt as though I was trapped inside a white wall. Suddenly, my night vision goggles detected movement. About 50 yards from the bunker, between two massive pine trees, someone was standing. I focused the light in that direction. What I saw made my blood run cold. It was not a human, nor any animal. It was a tall, hunched black shadow figure, at least 7 to 8 feet tall. It had no discernible face, but where the eyes should be, 2 glowing red dots stared fixedly at me. In Native American folklore, there are many descriptions of shadow people. It is said they are born from grief or places of unnatural death, but the entity standing in front of me was far more powerful. It did not move, it just stood there. I shouted a command, "Army, drop to the ground and show your hands," but the shadow figure gave no response. Instead, it began slowly merging deeper into the forest. The soldierly stubbornness and curiosity inside me drove me forward. I knew this could be a trap, yet I followed. I was running across the snow, but the strange thing was no matter how fast I ran, the distance between me and that shadow figure was not decreasing. It was as if it was floating over the air. Suddenly, I noticed this part of the forest was completely different. All the trees here were burned black, as if a massive wildfire had once swept through, yet no such fire had been mentioned in our briefing. When I reached the cover of a large rock, the shadow figure suddenly vanished. I swept my light around. Suddenly, my foot struck hard something. I brushed away the snow and saw it was an old army helmet, but not from our current uniform. It was a Vietnam War era style. Right in the center of the helmet was a bullet hole. My chest thumped hard. That was when I realized the shadow figures in the darkness of the forest were not isolated incidents. This Blackwood ridge was bearing witness to some old tragedy. At that very moment, from behind me came the sound of a thin branch snapping. I spun around instantly. In the beam of my light, I saw that shadow figure was no longer alone. One by one, 10 or 12 more similar tall shadows were emerging from the darkness of the forest. Together, they were surrounding me. They made no sound, no breath, only that bone-chilling stare of red eyes. I realized I had entered a place from which no human had ever returned alive. The rifle in my hands began to shake because I knew bullets could not kill these shadows.
As those tall shadow figures closed in around me, every nerve in my brain shifted into fight-or-flight mode. I knew that in our Special Forces training, we are taught to face many extreme situations, but there was no manual for fighting invisible spirits. Just when the shadows came within a few inches of me, the PRC-152 tactical radio clipped to my chest suddenly crackled to life with a deafening sound. Until now, the radio had been completely dead. There was no signal. But now, a kind of high-frequency static noise began pouring out of it, which seemed to make the shadow figures hesitate slightly. I tried turning the radio knob to set the frequency. Suddenly, from within that harsh static noise, a human voice emerged, but that voice was not normal. It sounded as if someone was speaking from very far away, from underwater. The voice kept repeating, "Mayday, Mayday, this is Outpost 9. We are under heavy fire. They are not human. I repeat, they are not human." The hair on my body stood on end. Outpost 9? There was supposed to be no such thing as Outpost 9 in the Blackwood Ridge area. And the most terrifying thing was, the code language and signal protocol that voice was using were not from the present-day U.S. Army. It was American Army signal style from the Cold War period of the 1950s or 65s. Popping sounds were coming from the radio, making it sound as if continuous gunfire was erupting all around. With trembling hands, I pressed the PTT button and said, "This is Sergeant Soren. Who is this? What is your location?" A reply came from the other side, but this time the voice felt familiar. It was my own voice. The person on the other end of the radio was crying out in my tone, calling my name. "Rowan, do not return to the bunker. They are waiting for you there. Do not trust Miller." As soon as I heard this, the shadow figures around me seemed to merge with the air and vanish. But the radio signal grew even stronger. Suddenly, a sharp whistling sound came through my headset, which struck my brain directly through my ears. I screamed in pain and collapsed onto the snow. The radio signal was now caught in a loop. In that loop, some mechanical noises could be heard, and intermittently, the sound of a child's laughter. In the history of the USA, there are many mysteries about number stations or mysterious radio signals. But in the middle of the forest, with no tower around, interference like this on my encrypted military radio is impossible. I realized these radio waves were not actually an electronic signal, but rather an old incorporeal memory of Blackwood Ridge, which kept returning. I staggered to my feet. Suddenly, looking at my radio screen, I saw there was no frequency number. Instead, a date appeared on the digital display, November 12th, 1974. I remembered exactly 50 years ago on this day, a U.S. Army helicopter mysteriously disappeared in this area. I was standing near that crash site today. Suddenly, the signal stopped completely. Then, a very calm voice spoke through the radio. "You were very late, Rowan. They are inside you now." I looked at my hands. Something black was flowing rapidly like a vein under the skin of my hands. I realized this ominous signal was not just a warning, it was a portal through which something was trying to enter me. I ripped the radio from my hands and threw it onto the snow, but the signal was still playing. From that device on the ground, my own cries were still echoing. As soon as I ran frantically across the snow back towards the main camp, the words from the radio kept ringing in my head, "Do not trust Atlas." Upon reaching the camp, I saw Sergeant Atlas sitting alone by the fire. His face looked unnaturally crimson in the firelight. Gasping, I stood before him. The black vein-like marks on my hands were slowly fading, but inside my body it felt as cold as ice. Atlas looked at me and slowly said, "So, you've seen it. They gave you the signal?" I stared at him in shock. Atlas knew? I shouted, "Sergeant, what is really happening here? What is Outpost 9, and what happened here on November 12th, 1974? Atlas let out a long sigh and took a sip of whiskey from his old flask. Then, what he said, I was not prepared to hear. He began, "During the Vietnam War in the 1970s, the U.S. Army ran a secret project here.
It was called Project Omega. The objective was to create a type of electromagnetic frequency capable of controlling the enemy's mind. But during one phase of the experiment, something awakened inside these ancient mountains of Blackwood Ridge, which they could not control. While Atlas was speaking, another colleague, Corporal Henderson, emerged from the tent. Henderson's family had lived in this Montana area for generations. He pulled an old copper medal from his necklace. Henderson said, "My grandfather was a civilian contractor here in 1974. He said on November 12th of that year, 12 members of the signal station vanished overnight. No struggle, no blood. Only their radios emitted the same cry for the next 50 years. Today marks the completion of that 50 years, Rowan." Henderson further explained that the local natives called this mountain the Drain. They believed that the wall between the real world and the shadow world was very thin here. When the army turned on that high-frequency signal, that thin wall tore. The result? Those who heard the signal, their souls no longer remained in this world. They became those tall shadow figures which I had just seen. Atlas suddenly leaned towards me. His eyes now carried a strange detachment. He whispered, "You know, Soren, why you were sent here? Everyone in our unit is somehow connected to that 1974 incident. My father was in charge of that mission, and your father was the pilot of that helicopter, which never landed." My mind shattered. Since childhood, I knew my father had died in a plane crash, but that it happened here in Blackwood Ridge, my mother had never told me. Atlas then pulled out a yellowed old photo from his pocket. In the picture, a group of smiling soldiers were standing, and in the very center stood my father. Written on the back in red ink, "The ritual is incomplete. We need the blood of the heir." Suddenly, the campfire's flame turned blue. With the hissing of the wind, it felt as if thousands of people were screaming at once. Atlas and Henderson both froze, their pupils becoming clouded. I realized what they were saying was not just history. They had actually lured me into a trap. The black veins coursing through my body began pulsing again. Now I was not alone. Every inch of this mountain, like a torn page from my father's old diary, wanted the taste of my blood. Beside the Blackwood Ridge campfire, when Sergeant Atlas showed me my father's mysterious photo, that's when the horrifying night began, which could have been the last night of my life. As Atlas and Henderson's pupils slowly became cloudy, I realized these people were no longer the colleagues I knew. They had become like robots, moved by some invisible puppet master. The blue flame of the fire suddenly snapped, went out. The entire camp was now submerged in pitch-black darkness. I tried to activate my night vision goggles, but they were jammed. Just then, from outside the bunker, came a sound no human on Earth is prepared to hear. It was like a mechanical scream, several tons of iron being scraped together at once. Mixed within it was the roar of a violent beast. I turned on the tactical light of my M4 rifle. As the beam cut through the wall of fog toward the front, I saw something beyond any human imagination. In front of the massive steel door of the bunker stood a colossal entity. Calling it a figure would be wrong. It looked somewhat humanoid or human-like, but its height was at least 12 to 15 feet. Its entire body was made of some black, smoke-like substance, but through that smoke, sometimes white bone-like structures could be seen. The most grotesque was its face. There were no eyes, only a huge cavity from which that dark vapor continuously emanated. In the deep forests of Lake Superior or Maine, many speak of the rake or similar creatures, but this was several times more powerful. As it stepped forward, the ground beneath my feet trembled. Trembling with fear, I placed my finger on the trigger and fired 3 consecutive shots. but the bullets passed through the being's body and struck the tree behind it, as if it were something ethereal. The entity suddenly extended its long whip-like arm. I dived to the side, but when that arm passed over my shoulder, I felt an intense electric shock. My whole body was going numb. Just then, the shadow figures emerged again from around the bunker. They were no longer still. They all formed a circle and began to dance, chanting in an alien language. I was writhing on the ground. Suddenly, I noticed the enormous monster was now speaking. Its voice sounded like the multiple frequencies of some radio station. It said, "Soren, this portal was sealed with your blood. It will open with your blood." I realized my father had trapped them in these mountains in 1974 with his own life. He knew they would not be freed without the blood of his lineage. Suddenly, the monster came very close to me. Its black vapor brushed against my face, smelling of rotting flesh and burnt copper. I pulled out my father's old medal from my pocket, the one Henderson had given me. The moment I touched the metal, it became hot like fire. I threw it at the entity. A deafening explosion erupted, and the entire forest was filled with white light for a moment. I saw the colossal being curling in pain, but the danger was not over. I knew this was only the beginning. That deep night, standing outside the bunker of Blackwood Ridge, I realized I was not just a soldier. I was the last witness of an ancient battle, where the enemy was no nation, but an ancient form of Satan itself. The explosion of the metal covered everything in white light, but as the light faded, I fell into an extreme mental hallucination. Two worlds floated before my eyes. On one side, the eerily blood-frozen dark forest of Blackwood Ridge, and on the other, my small wooden house in Montana from my childhood, where my father had last held me. A war was raging inside my mind. On one side, my U.S. Army training, telling me to raise my rifle and fight to the last bullet. On the other, my inner civilian self, who just wanted to escape alive. As I knelt by the bunker door, a strange event occurred. Suddenly, someone stood beside me. I looked. It was not Sergeant Atlas, nor Henderson. It was me. An exact reflection of myself was looking at me, smiling, but its eyes were as black as a deep well. The doppelganger whispered, "Soren, who are you fighting for? Soren, do you really want to stop those devils, or do you want to be lost like your father?" In American psychological thrillers, we often see when a person is in extreme danger, their subconscious begins to deceive them. But this was more real than that. Two kinds of voices came to my ears. On one side, my father's voice, saying, "Run, Rowan, run." And on the other, Atlas's mechanical voice, "Duty first, soldier. Your blood will bring peace to this mountain." The M4 rifle in my hands now felt unbearably heavy. Should I shoot? At whom? At this air or at myself? I looked at the American flag patch on my uniform, but where the enemy is not flesh and blood, what does duty mean? At that moment, I remembered an old U.S. Army proverb. A soldier doesn't fight because he hates what is in front of him, but because he loves what is behind him. Behind me, my mother, my sister, my town. If I do not close this mountain's gate today, these shadow figures will spare no one. My fear instantly hardened into ironclad resolve. But then, the black veins inside me began to revolt again. A pain started in my bones, as if someone was tearing my skin alive. My mind commanded me to pull the main lever inside the bunker, which would overload the old generators beneath this mountain. Just then, on the bunker wall, I saw an old carved inscription, my father's handwriting. It said, "Trust your blood, not your mind." I realized my duty was not only to the country, my duty now was to end the curse of my lineage. Taking a deep breath, I began descending the bunker's dark stairs, where the ultimate test of my life awaited. I remember the intense flicker of blue light which engulfed the entire bunker with the generator's explosion. I closed my eyes, waiting for death, but death did not come. Instead, I felt a strange emptiness. I don't know how long I was unconscious, but when I opened my eyes, a peculiar silence welcomed me. No mechanical roars, no incorporeal cries. Even the toxic black veins in my hands were gone. I stumbled up the bunker stairs. When I pushed the heavy steel door and stepped outside, my eyes widened. The ugly, bone-chilling dark forest of Blackwood Ridge was now shimmering in the golden sunlight of dawn. The snowfall from last night had stopped. The sky was completely clear, as usually seen in autumn mornings in the American Northwest. The pine trees were dripping melted snow, and somewhere in the distance I could hear the sound of a woodpecker. Everything seemed so normal that it felt as if the horrors of last night had been merely a nightmare. But the astonishment was yet to come. As I made my way towards our main camp, I saw Sergeant Atlas and Corporal Henderson drinking coffee, completely unharmed. The cloudiness in their eyes was gone, no abnormality on their faces. Miller saw me and laughed. "Morning, Rowan. Did you spend the whole night in the bunker? I didn't see you come out even once."
I stood there stunned. Had I truly gone mad? I asked Henderson, "That fight last night, those shadow people, that explosion? Do you remember anything?" Henderson stared at me in shock. "What are you talking about, buddy? Last night we just played cards and had dinner, then went to sleep. The weather was quite nice, too." Unconsciously, I reached into my pocket. My father's old medal was gone. The burnt marks on my uniform were also gone. I went to the part of the forest where I had fired at night. There were no bullet casings on the snow, no footprints. Even that large rock next to which I had found that Vietnam-era helmet, that rock itself was gone. It was as if a time slip or a parallel universe had occurred. There are many such stories in the mysterious zones of Montana State or Maine, where people disappear for hours and return to find time and reality altered. I went to wash my face at a small stream beside the camp, but seeing my reflection in the water made my blood freeze again. In the clear water of the stream, there was no one behind me, yet a deep scar on my own forehead was clearly visible, exactly like that helmet of my father's. And the greater mystery was, when I went to take a sip of coffee, I looked at my wristwatch. The watch had stopped exactly at 2:15 a.m., exactly when that radio signal had shown the date, November 12th, 1974. In daylight, Blackwood Ridge now looks like a pleasant tourist spot, but I know these mountains are made of more than just rock and soil. This daytime normalcy is just a mask. The mountains know what I have seen. They know I have sealed something with my blood, but in return, they have stolen my reality. As we packed up the camp and returned, I once looked towards the mountain peak. It seemed the shadow figure was waving from behind the mist. Was it bidding farewell, or reminding me that I have never truly left this mountain? I am now sitting in my Montana house drinking coffee, yet I do not know if this sun, this sky, this room is real, or if I am still trapped in the bunker of Blackwood Ridge. A year has passed since the Blackwood Ridge mission. I have now retired honorably from the U.S. Army and returned to that old house in Montana. From the outside, I appear completely healthy, a normal citizen, jogging in the morning and joining neighbors for a barbecue in the evening. But my inner world has frozen on that night of November 12th. Sometimes at night, when the Montana mountain breeze strikes my window, I wake up with a jolt. It feels like I am lying in that damp bunker. The strangest thing is, whenever I stand in front of a mirror, I see the reflection of that red dot in my own pupils.
the same one I had seen in the eyes of the shadow figures. The American dream I had desired now feels like nothing but a haze. I tried to contact Sergeant Atlas in Henderson, but according to Army records, there has been no post called Blackwood Ridge in the past 20 years. The sergeant named Atlas, whom I spoke of, supposedly died in a mysterious plane crash in 1980. Then who was with me on that mountain last night? Who did I have coffee with? The mystery of that copper medal Henderson had given me is still unresolved, because I have no physical proof. Only occasionally, random static noises drift through my radio or smartphone, and from under the water, that voice asks, "Have you truly returned, Soren?" The story could end here, but last week, an anonymous parcel arrived for me. There was no letter, only an old helmet, exactly in the Vietnam-era style, with a bullet hole in the center. I realized Blackwood Ridge never forgets its prey. I am now only waiting for the time when that radio frequency will activate again and call me back to my true address.
So friends, how did you like this terrifying true incident that happened to Soren? Must let us know by commenting. Your opinions help us to improve our next videos. That's all for today. We'll see you again very soon with the next new thrilling incident. Has any such supernatural or eerie incident happened in your life or with someone you know? If so, you can send us the experience of that true incident in writing. You can email us or directly message our Facebook page. Our email and Facebook page links are given in the channel description box. That true incident sent by you could be the terrifying mystery of the next video of our The True Shadow Hauntings.